Today, I would like to introduce a very special person, our wise sage of today for the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation. This is Reverend Dr. Kenn Gordon, and he is here to tell us about how he found Science of Mind. Dr. Gordon is in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, and so I bet it's pretty cold up there in this bright we're still in December 2018. And so, Dr. Kenn, if you would just tell us about you and how you found Science of Mind and about your family background and all the many ways that you have served our organizations throughout the years. It's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Marilyn. Actually, it's not cold up here. We're getting our first snow of the year, which is unusual for December 26th. Kelowna is a microclimate. It's not dissimilar to Arrowhead or Big Bear as far as the way it's made up. So it's not bad at all. Funny, this is the town that I was raised in. I was born in Vancouver, but we moved here when I was about 6 months old, I guess. And so this is my hometown, and Deb and I returned back here in 1993 from a period of about 12 years living in Southern California and started the church here, the Center for Spiritual Living Kelowna. I worked for a corporation in Vancouver called United Foods. I ran United Foods for a while, and what occurred was I discovered that business really wasn't my passion nor my pathway. And what actually happened to me was I kind of had a little burnout when I was in my early 30s. I had a brand new baby daughter, and I found myself getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and going to work and coming home at 8 o'clock at night, falling asleep on the couch, and then getting up in the morning and doing it all over again. And I knew something was missing, and I was kind of flat. And so Deborah's father actually had purchased a big farm down in Thermal, California, which was south of Indio, south of Palm Springs. And Deb and I went down there for a holiday. We hopped into a car and drove down with our baby girl and arrived in Palm Springs, Palm Desert, and moved out to the farm and started to live there for a couple of months just to take a break. And what happened was the type A personality that I guess I am kind of kicked in. And the next thing you knew, I was farming. And we grew that 160-acre farm to 1,100 acres in that 12-year period of time. So we were kind of going at it. We were growing hay for the polo clubs and the equestrian centers down there. And it was a fascinating life. I wouldn't have not done it. But on the flip side of the coin, I don't think I'd do it again. During that period of time, what happened was my daughter came to us looking for a Sunday school. And I'd been raised in the United Church of Canada, which is a Methodist Lutheran church here in Canada, a combined church. And so up until the age of 15, I'd pretty much been at church. And so I was quite accustomed to it. So I thought, well, we'll just go back to the Lutheran. We'll go back to the Methodist. Deborah had come from a Catholic background, so I thought maybe we'll go back to the Catholics as well. Actually, I kind of liked the thought of going to the Catholic Church because that's where all the Cadillacs and Mercedes were, and I thought they must be doing pretty good. But what happened was a friend of ours suggested that we go to the Religious Science of the Desert, which was Tom Costa's church. And so one Sunday morning, we got dressed and went down to the church to take our daughter to Sunday school and put her into the Sunday school and waited for her by going to the service. And lo and behold, the gentleman speaking that particular day was Raymond Charles Barker. And I must be honest with you, I really didn't enjoy it much because I'm far too staid. And I sat and listened to it, and we picked up Kelsey and we went back home again. The next Sunday, I went to get up to go to church in the morning and get dressed, thinking that we were going to go to the Lutheran or the Methodist or maybe perhaps the Catholic. And instead, what happened was Deborah said, I'm going back to that religious science church. And I said something to the effect of, oh, shucks, do we have to? And she said, well, you go wherever you want. I'm going back to the religious science church. So we went, and sure enough, Dr. Tom was there that particular day. And I'll tell you what drew me in personally was before the service, he came up and introduced himself. And after the service, he remembered my name. From that point forward, we were there every Sunday for 6 years. We went through classes, which were some of the most enlightening, wonderful things I ever saw. My majors in university were philosophy and political science. And so I wasn't unaccustomed to the concepts, but I was unaccustomed to the application of them in my life. And what I discovered from it was here I had a place where all of the things that I held to be true and believed to be true were actually being practiced by a large group of people. And the energy that existed in there was spectacular. So we went into classes and we took every class possible. And pretty soon we found ourselves on a practitioner path and started to become practitioners in the church, which I enjoyed immensely. One day I was standing outside by Costa Hall and Dr. Tom was standing next to me and he said to me, "So are you going to take ministerial classes this year?" And I said, "No, I don't think so. You know, I've got a young family and I'm farming. I really don't think I have the time." He was very fond of saying the 7 most powerful words in his life were, "Won't you come to church with me on Sunday, huh?" Mine were him saying to me, "Well, I guess I could understand that. If I had those responsibilities, I probably wouldn't have taken it either." And for me, that was just a challenge. So Deb and I signed up and we went into ministerial classes. And all the way through the classes, we were under the impression that we would not become ministers, that we were doing it for the intellectual stimulation of taking the course. And I've got to laugh because I can remember we had a large class and we played the part where we played the instructors. When we started to get ready to go for the oral exams, Deb and I did the exams and we were the ones who gave the exams rather than took them because we had no intention of entering ministry. So we went through that. And one day I went home and I made a pro and con list because I was somewhat flat. I wasn't feeling very good about everything that was going on. I really wasn't getting any juice from it. So I made this list. And on the list, it found out that all of the joy, all of the satisfaction, and all of the fulfillment I was getting in life was coming from what volunteer work that Deb and I were doing at the Palm Desert Church of Religious Science. All of the money came from the farm. And that was about it. So I determined that I was going to actually take the ministerial class, that I was going to go to what was then called the intensive. And so back in those days, you could only have one minister in a new church. And I knew we were going to start one. So I just went to the intensive and waited to see whether or not I passed. And when I found out I did pass, it was very gratifying. It was very nice. And then we really started to move and get going. And I'll share with you that my idea was coming from a church of 1,200 people, which Dr. Tom had. I thought, I'm just going to get in the motorhome. We're going to go north. And as soon as we find a location someplace where 1,200 people show up to hear me speak, that's where we'll build our church. Well, we went for lunch with a friend of ours, a woman by the name of Noli Hartwell, who became a minister and started the White Rock Center. And we were at lunch with her and her husband, and it was one of those conversations where I was talking to her husband, Colin, and I could hear Deb and Noli talking over on the side. And Noli kept saying, "I think Ken should go back to Kelowna and start the church in his hometown, to go to Kelowna, your guys' hometown." And I kept hearing Deb say, "Yeah, I think that's a good idea." It was one of those conversations where I was trying to listen to Colin, but I was really listening to the other conversation. And I remember I was getting quite agitated and upset because I had no intention of going back to Kelowna because I was frightened that if I showed up there as a minister, what people would think, because I was somewhat of a rowdy kid. So after lunch, we got into the car and we were driving back to the church to pick up my pickup truck. And on our drive back there, I said to Deb, you know, I thought you were going to support us in going off in the motorhome and going around the Pacific Northwest and finding a location to start a church. How come you were talking about going to Kelowna? And Deb said, you know, you pulled me out of Kelowna and moved me to Palm Desert. And that was bad enough. But now you want me to turn around and twist my life up and go back up to Kelowna. She said, the only place I'm going to go with you to start a church is Kelowna. Can't you just open your mind to the possibility? And I said something to the effect of, no, I can't open my mind to the possibility. And so we got back, picked up my truck, went home. And the next day I was going with Reverend Tony Heggie up to Lake Tahoe because Tony'd been invited up. They wanted a church built there, and Tony was a ministerial student with me. And so we popped into his car the next Monday and we started to drive up to Lake Tahoe. And on our drive, as we were driving through the Sierras, we were driving along, and I can remember looking out the window, and I remember looking at the beautiful scenery and everything, and I saying to Tony, you know, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. I love it up here. It looks just like Kelowna, except Kelowna has greener grass. Oh my gosh, this is beautiful out here. It looks just like Kelowna, except Kelowna is wilder. Oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. It looks just like Kelowna, except Kelowna has more animals and all that stuff. And finally, Heggie said to me, for God's sakes, Ken, why don't you just go to Kelowna and start a church? And I said, funny you should say that, and told him the story of what had happened on Sunday. And so all the way up and all the way back down again, what we did was we processed my belief system on how it worked. And so I get back to Palm Desert and I walk into my house, and I don't know, it's probably the next weekend. And I was doing the very last volunteer job I had with Dr. Tom at the Palm Desert Church. And that was running his annual golf tournament. You can imagine what a golf tournament in Palm Desert looks like. So I'd completed it and I came home, and Deb and the kids weren't there. And I walked inside the house, and you remember those little black boxes with flashing lights that said you had a phone call from someone? Yes. There it was, playing away for me. And so I went over and I picked up the phone, and on the other end of the phone, this voice came over and it said, I'm looking for Kenn Gordon. My name is Reverend Lloyd Klein, and I'm from Vernon, and I would like to talk to him. Now, Vernon's about 38 miles north of Kelowna, and Lloyd had a church there. And I thought, oh, golly, I bet you I know what he wants to talk about. And so I was too frightened to pick up the phone and phone him. So instead, I waited for Deb and Kelsey and Mackenzie to come home. And finally, they showed up and they walked inside the house. And I said, listen to this. And I turned on the tape, and there was Lloyd's voice. And so Deb and I kind of looked at each other. And I went over to the phone, and I picked up the phone, and I phoned Lloyd Klein in Vernon. And when he picked up the phone, I said, Reverend Lloyd, please. And he said, speaking. I said, Reverend Lloyd, this is Kenn Gordon. I'm returning your call. And he said, oh, Ken, how wonderful. I'm so glad you called me back. Listen, I'm thinking, I'm doing classes down in Kelowna right now. And I'm thinking that we should start a church there. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to come up and start it, because I understand you're licensed now, or you're available to do that. And I said right away, yes. And he said to me, well, tell me something then. And he said, do you think you're going to have any trouble getting into Canada being an American? I said, actually, Lloyd, I'm not an American. I'm a Canadian. And he said, oh, how marvelous how the universe works things out. I'm so glad to hear that. He said, do you know anything about the region? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I grew up there and my family all lives there. And he said, oh, how wonderful. So that was my calling. That's how I got the calling to get into it. I was a poor, lost little soul who found Science of Mind looking for a Sunday school for my daughter. I went through it. I fell in love with it. It then and today is the most valuable thing in my life. It is the thing that turned my life around. I have never been more fulfilled or feeling more productive or more creative or more wanted or desired than I am right now at my particular life. And that's the way it's been for the last 30 years in this teaching. This teaching just opens you up to the possibilities that are there. Raymond Charles Barker used to say that when he had any conflict in his life or any frustration, that he would go into the den in his apartment and he would close the door and he'd say, Barker, you need a bigger idea. And that's what this teaching provides us with. It's the ability to have that bigger idea. And as Dr. Holmes says, you have to practice and you have to put it into application. And my whole experience with Science of Mind has been an experience of developing and growing that idea, building a bigger idea around my life. And I rely on that statement. And so when I run into conflict in my life, what I attempt to do is to go outside and do my contemplation and figure out what bigger idea I need, whether it's around health, wealth, creative expression, or loving relationships. This whole experience of Science of Mind, from the finding of it to where and what I'm doing today, has been a divine experience. I think on some level that it's soul and that I was called to it. And that calling that came through was a calling that served me. And in that way, I learned to serve others. And through service of others, I found out that I was actually serving myself. So it's been a spectacular situation. You know, I've done just about everything that I can think of in Religious Science International, International Centers for Spiritual Living, and Centers for Spiritual Living. You asked me earlier to explain what jobs I've held. And when I look at it, I think one way or another, I've either been a chair or on just about every committee that ever existed that we've had and been involved with it. So I came through it in a very interesting way. In the early days, I had a far more powerful left brain. And I found that with my practice that I've become more balanced through the process, which has been very gratifying and very satisfying. In 1999, I was asked to stand for the board of directors of Religious Science International. And that was another divine experience, because I can remember that I was at a Sillamar and I was standing outside, and somebody came up to me and said, I'm going to put your name forward to be appointed to the board in lieu of somebody who'd stepped down, Dr. James Golden. And I was standing there and I said, no, I don't think so. You know, I'm trying to build a church. I'm way too busy to do that. And I remember they said, well, I'm building a church and I'm too busy too, but somehow or other I managed to fit it in. So I went back into the Merrill Hall and I went upstairs to the balcony where Deb and I were sitting. And I sat down and I was so pleased that somebody had asked me. And I remember saying to Deb, Deb, you know, you won't believe it, but somebody just said they were going to ask to have me appointed on the board of directors. And she said, and what'd you say? And I said, I'd think about it. She said, oh, okay, that's good. And so I sat and I listened to the speaker. And when the speaker was done, I went back outside again. I went back down from the balcony. I went out. And when I went out this time, another person came up to me and said, you know, we would like to see you appointed in Dr. James's position. And I remember thinking, I don't know. And now I was really, really fumbling. And I went back up to the balcony and I sat down next to Deb, and Dr. David Walker was just getting up to give his talk. And I sat next to her and I told her again, and she smiled and said, so what'd you say? And I said, I'm thinking about it. And so I'm sitting there and I'm not really listening to Walker speak. I'm kind of fomenting everything in my mind. And so as I'm doing that, I remember I put my head down, I put it between my hands, and I'm thinking, and all of a sudden, and I'm kind of treating, and what I'm saying is, show me a sign, show me a sign. And all of a sudden I hear Dr. Walker say, and if you're looking for a sign, and I looked up and looked across at the dais way down at the end of Merrill Hall, and he laughingly pulled out a sign that said, beware of dog, and everybody gave a great roar of laughter, and he went back to it. That was my sign. And there I was. Now I knew, oh my gosh, show me a sign, and there it shows up. So I said yes. And So I went on in 1999, and in 2001, they made me a vice president. And I was a vice president 2001 to 2003 when Candace Beckett was elected as the president. And then I was her vice president for 4 years, very, very active. And then in 2007, I was elected president of Religious Science International. And 2012, I was elected spiritual leader for Centers for Spiritual Living. Between literally 2007, and it had already been underway, but literally between 2007 and 2003 rather, and 2007, what we did was we worked on this integration. The idea that the United Church of Religious Science and Religious Science International should come together. We both had the same branding person working for us, Chuck Pettis. And Chuck had done United before he did Religious Science International. And I remember he made the map of who United was. And then when he came to work for us, he made a map of who Religious Science International was. And I can remember him coming into a meeting once and showing us the United map and then showing us our map and saying, you know, if this was a transparency and I put it on top, one on top of the other, the only differences would be the spelling mistakes. They were almost identical. And so me and a whole bunch of other people, we just kind of got thinking that this is the way it should work, and that we started to move in that direction. And it was very fulfilling. It took an awful lot of work, a lot of cajoling, and to a certain degree, we're still doing some of it, although I must say after almost 7 years of Centers for Spiritual Living that this idea of integration, I think, has finally come together, which is great. And I believe that that was probably the biggest accomplishment that I did for religious science, or that I participated in for religious science, was working and helping guide that process to bring it into fruition and make it occur. I believe that Centers for Spiritual Living, religious science, science of mind, whatever you choose or deem to call it, I think that it is the gift of the world right now. You know, Dr. Holmes called it the religion of the 21st century. And he made sure that when he said it, he said religious science is the religion of the 21st century, although it might not be called that. And I believe that it's needed more and required more than it ever has in the past. What I do see, though, is that some adjustments need to be made. Not adjustments to the teaching, because the teaching and the truths that it teaches are constant, but to the application and how it's applied, and to the evolution of the individuals that are really participating in it. You know, Dr. Holmes in his radio show would say, there's a power in the universe that's greater than I am, and I can use it. And I firmly believe that that's true. And I think that that's where religious science and science of mind was for the last several decades, is working on that premise. But I think that the evolution is an evolution of really opening ourselves to appreciate the next phrase, which has got to be, there's a power in the universe that's greater than I am, and it can use me. And I think that what we're seeing in science of mind today is a change and a transformation, a zeitgeist, so to speak, of the consciousness of those involved, to an opening of more listening and less directing. Not that directing is wrong. I think we should do the same amount of direction, but I can't help but believe that it's time for us to listen to that inner knowledge a little bit clearer and a little bit better. And I believe that that's what's happening right now, is this teaching, which is so foundational, is really opening up to a bigger expression of the divine itself through the individual's ownership of it. And to do that, I think listening to it is going to have to be part of it, so that we can move from the mental science into another kind of science. it's kind of interesting when I think about it and when I look at it, because, you know, Holmes always said thought plus feeling equals manifestation. And we had the thought down pat for a great many years, at least in international we did. And what I find is the bigger experience is to really tie that feeling in to match it and to go along with it. And I believe that that's what's happening, and that's what's moving in the evolution of who we are and how we apply it. And I think that that application is one that demands more practice from each and every one of us. A deeper spiritual practice, a wider and broader spiritual practice than we've utilized before. Whether or not Science of Mind has transformed the world, for me, isn't even in question. When Deb and I came back to Kelowna in 1993 to start our church, the first class I ever gave was in a grade 3 classroom. And you can imagine teaching an adult class in a grade 3 elementary school, all the little desks and people sitting at it and everything. And I think I had my opening class, I think we had 8 students. And I can remember coming in, and I was brand new out of ministerial school, and I thought, oh, this is wonderful. And I go in and I'm thinking, here I am. I just came back from California to the hinterland of British Columbia. And all these people, I've got so much to teach them, so much to say. I've learned so much in the last 6 years, I can hardly wait. And I walked into the room and I looked up, and all the way around the balance of the ceiling were all of the affirmations for the grade 3 kids that I'd already learned, that I thought I was so bright to do. And they were learning it in grade 3 in a public school. It was already inculcated in their educational system. All the positive affirmations, all the statements of truth, all the self-acknowledgements and the knowing. And I can remember looking at it and just laughing and thinking, oh my God. And since then, what I've primarily done is run as fast as I could to stay in front of them, because they are already connected at a level that I had to learn to be connected at that level. And what I'm finding is that the new generation of religious scientists, and I'm not talking chronological here, I'm just talking about the new generation of religious scientists, came into this world knowing that. They were already aware of the connectivity and the connection with it. And that's who I want to be. I want to be so seamless in my personality that I have the same hat on when I'm talking to you in this video, or whether I'm giving a service in front of a large group of people, or whether I'm talking to my grandchildren. I want to be the same person at that same time. And that authenticity and actualization is the greatest gift that I got from this wonderful teaching called Science of Mind. It was something that transformed my life, not always comfortably, I might add, but it transformed my life through a recognition of the power of the universe existing within the individual, and at the same time, rubbing off all the egoism that would come with that, so that it becomes the natural way of being, as opposed to a way of being that we're pretending to be. So when I go to page, I think it's 384 of the Science of Mind text, and Dr. Holmes says that he would rather have someone live this teaching than be able to quote every word ever written in every metaphysical book ever made. I find myself in a situation where I appreciate that that is what is mine to do, is to learn to be able to become it as opposed to know it. And to do that, what I know I have to do is I have to listen more closely, and I have to direct my faith in a direction where I don't question it. Sometimes I find that I have a greater faith in my ability to be able to be linear and intellectualize something than I have in spirit itself. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think it's a huge flaw that exists. And so my practice on a day-to-day basis is to have an unconditional faith in the knowledge and the knowing of the goodness of the universe, and appreciating that it operates through the truth of my being, not through the neuroses that I bury it in. And so on a regular basis, my spiritual practice is to surrender everything I think I need to be complete and fall back into the truth of who I am. And when I get there, what happens is that I am complete. Let's go back to the very beginning where I talked about Deborah wanting to go to Kelowna and me wanting to travel around. It takes a surrender to be able to see the truth when it shows up in your life, no matter how many times it's pointed out to you. Or perhaps I could word that in a different way. I need to surrender to that truth and that knowledge quicker than I used to in the past. And I think that that is the teaching of Science of Mind in a nutshell. There are a lot of people who know half the truth. They know that they can direct the mind and create form and demonstration in their life, but maybe perhaps they miss the point of the truth of who they really are. Mm-hmm. And who they really are is an individualization of the light of life itself. Right. And so that practice of being able to feel and embrace that concept is the practice that I believe will take our teaching into a new era where humanity will accept it because they resonate with it, because it's the truth and they know it. You and I know when we talk to people and they feel it for the first time, that it's not something that they've learned, it's something that they've uncovered. And the uncovery of that for me, and I think for most people, means the removal of the filters that I have that exist between me and life. And that's that self-acceptance. And so I see us moving forward as long as we're prepared to evolve. And there will always be people who do not want to evolve and want to drag their feet, and that's okay, they're blessed. And they actually are important for us to be able to grow where we need to grow to. It's an isometric experience. Then there are always those who are running ahead and they're cutting edge and they've been so far ahead, it's hard to hang on to them. And I think that my job has been primarily to hold on to the belt loops of those who are whisking ahead in evolving in their consciousness and moving into the new ideas. And at the same time, reaching back and holding on to those who are moving slow and trying to keep everyone moving at the same pace so that what happens is that we arrive at the same place at the same time. Because after all, we believe there's only one, and that means that the person who doesn't want to change is who I am, and the person who wants to move faster is who I am. And the job of spiritual leader is to be able to hold in both of them so that what we can do is move forward together. So I'm very grateful for everything that I've gotten from religious science and Science of Mind. And I'm very grateful for you, for all the great work you've done, Dr. Marilyn, for creating the archives and all of the application you have. And I believe that the future of the world, while not dependent upon people who are willing to do this work, the future of the world relies upon people who are willing to do this work, even though sometimes it's uncomfortable to do it. So thank you.
Well, I want to thank you. This has been a wonderful and special pleasure. I want to first thank you for being so prominent in the beginning of the organization of the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation itself. For it was you and your leadership and Dr. Beckett, Candace Beckett's also with RSI, and then with United People coming together and offering to allow the archives and library to come as one together And so I really, we appreciate that very, very much. And you were very prominent in that role. And I want to thank you for this wonderful interview and all that you have offered us. And I agree with you. I'm thinking that when people get back to really studying the Science of Mind textbook, Ernest has it all in there, exactly what you were saying. And so we really need to get back in there. You know, there are some ministers who started and read the Science of Mind textbook every year. As they began new classes, they would take a new textbook and read the whole thing again. So, and each time they would say, you know, I never saw that before. Oh, I didn't know that. And they find there's something new that they get out of the book as their own consciousness is receiving more. So,
Yeah.
So anyway, I thank you very, very much. And I do want to have an interview with Dr. Deborah also very soon. And so we'll get on that. I know you're both wise sages and you came into the movement at the same time. And really appreciate your time. So thank you very much and Happy New Year to you.
You as well. Thanks, Marilyn.
Thank you.